So, you know how I'm not one to ask stupid questions? Hmm? B glances sideways at you. You are sitting on a stool at the island in the kitchen at breakfast the next morning, idly pushing cereal around your bowl with a spoon. I just want to know, is there anything up with that mask, you ask? Like, is this Kylo Ren guy human or what? I believe he is, but I couldn't say, B responds curtly as he glances away from you. You're smart enough not to bog him down with pointless questions that don't pertain to the assignment, so when you do tend to ask an off-the-cuff question, he tends to have a ready answer. I had nightmares about that mask last night, Ladson says nonchalantly. He's sitting to your left, and so you don't have to do more than tilt your head to look over at him. You're a bit surprised, but decide it's better to say nothing. Still, he catches your expression regardless. What? The thing was creepy. Now I'm almost glad I didn't go yesterday, Sadie says from her spot on the couch. That was a voice distorter of some kind, wasn't it? You ask. I could hardly understand him when he spoke at first. That's got to be a bitch to interpret for, Shane says, coming to sit beside Ladson, skewing up his face in a terrible impression of C. I'm sorry, but could you tone down your modulator just a wee bit? I can't understand a bloody word you're saying. You laugh at this, as you do so many other things. Accents make the job harder for sure, although it's one of the understood difficulties of the job. There was absolutely nothing worse than trying to interpret your way through a dialogue where you couldn't discern the specific lexes of one half of the conversation, while the other half was laced with inside jokes and references that didn't make a lick of sense to you. It was a challenge that was sometimes fun, sometimes daunting, but always a seemingly superfluous struggle. Attempting to understand someone through a mask, with their voice purposely distorted, definitely highlighted the unnecessary aspect of that struggle. Well, I'll find out this morning, B says with a nonchalant sip of his mug. His candor surprises you as you all turn around to look at him. So, whatever you're doing, you have Kylo Ren's direct involvement, Shane asks. Can we suspect then that General Hux will be there as well? That information is not relevant to your assignment, B replies coolly. You are to report to your scheduled room assignments at the times I posted on the fridge. You all look over to the fridge, which is completely bare. See? I got it, he says as he comes in the room, a piece of paper clenched in the corner of his mouth as he fights to get his shirt on. Gross, you can hear Sadie mutter under her breath. He looks to tack it on the fridge, but can find nothing to hold it with. Oh, well, here you go, he says as he places it on the counter. It's closest to you, and you suspect he did that on purpose. And I'm with Taro, right? You ask, looking up at them. He took a liking to you, B says with a wink in your direction, and you can't help but beam. It wasn't that you were worried about being liked. It was just a work assignment. But at the same time, you had to work with him for 6 months. It wasn't necessarily a friendship you were concerned with, but a proper business relationship. If you had found out that yesterday you had inadvertently done something to cause Taro to want to stop working with you, it would have wrecked your confidence for the entire duration of your stay. We should be off, C murmurs to B, and he nods quickly as he sets his mug down in the sink. Please don't let me hear that you are late for your first assignments, he tells you. Sadie, Shane, you both should go a little bit earlier to introduce yourselves to your partners. You two already know your partners, but it can help to talk to them and get to know them a little bit better. Just have a regular conversation, probe for their language skills to help aid in your interpretation, but under no circumstances are you to ask or discuss what their ultimate objective here is. Do you understand? You all nod solemnly and wait in silence for them to leave the room. Well, that was pretty ominous, Shane says at last, when he's sure they're out of earshot. Are you still poking your nose where it doesn't belong? Ladson asks. No, I'm going to drop it, Shane says. I'm going to do my job. But I'm just curious, though. I can't help that. Well, try to help it, you say bitterly. You turn to Ladson. Did you really have nightmares about Kylo Ren last night? He shrugs noncommittally and looks away from you. Do you think he's human? Humanoid, he confirms. A bit tall and lanky, though, but I don't know how much of that was the suit. Well, usually if you're going to wear armor, you want it to make you look a bit beefier, you say with a roll of your shoulders. I don't know. The voice modulator thing is weird, though. Maybe he's wearing that weird mask covering, but it's because he's got, like, tentacles under there or something. Okay, now I really want to see this guy to know what the two of you are going on about, Sadie says. Latson rolls his eyes. Trust us when we say that you really don't. He turns around to address everyone in the room. Since you all slept in, I had a little private time to talk to B. Apparently, General Hux can be nice if you catch him in a good mood, but he was warned that Kylo Ren is another beast entirely. He's apparently been known to fly off the handle and exhibit intense fits of violence and take his rage out on whatever's nearby. He shrugs. Just so you know, stay away from him. Yikes, Sadie says. Latson turns back to the counter and you can't help but catch the look in his eye as he turns. He's afraid. He's afraid that you might be in danger here, that this mission is a lot more precarious than they had previously let on. What if he was right? What if you were all in physical danger from being here? Well, there's nothing you could do about it now. You had already signed the contract. 6 months here, and then you could go home. You push your half-eaten bowl of cereal away, suddenly not able to eat anymore. You weren't scared exactly, no, you had nothing to hide. You didn't have the Force, you didn't have any secret information that they wanted, and your pockets weren't lined with valuable resources. You had absolutely nothing to offer them aside from your linguistic skills. And when those were no longer needed, would they... You shake your head. No, they wouldn't kill you. That would be silly. They had a reputation for being evil, for committing atrocities, but those were soldiers in the middle of a battle. This had to be different. This may have been a military installation, but surely it couldn't be completely run by soldiers. There had to be other ordinary civilians, ordinary technicians, cooks, and medical staff keeping the base up and running on a daily basis. You shake your head and let your forehead slip into the palm of your hand. The job hadn't even really started yet, and already you want to turn tail and head home. In a group, you head down the corridors, getting lost exactly 4 times before Sadie, to the surprise of everyone, leads you in the correct direction. You'd always thought that you had a pretty keen navigational sense, but considering you got everyone more lost than they had been when Shane was directing the charge, you felt that you could no longer own to your previous navigational skills. Fortunately for you, there were 2 rooms on each side of the hall, and so you would all stay pretty close together if any of you needed anything. Usually interpreters worked in teams of 2 for lengthy assignments, or simply for support, since interpreting could be extremely mentally and physically taxing, but since there was a limited number of you, you had to do the best you could with what you had. You enter the room to see a table and 3 chairs, one on one side of the table and 2 on the other. You huff and immediately pull one of the chairs around to the side of the table so that you are in equal distance between both parties. Setting up the room was always an overlooked part of your job, and so you had promptly learned to develop upper body strength so you could quickly and easily move chairs, tables, and other heavy furnishings as required. It was important to take a seat between the 2 parties, enforcing as neutral of a position as possible while maintaining a clear line of sight so that the person you were signing with could see you clearly. It was no longer a surprise to you how often this fact was overlooked or even ignored, even in the most formal of settings. You sit down in the chair, pleased to see that it swivels quite easily. It would definitely make it easier to turn your body between the 2 parties to make the turn-taking aspect of communication clear, but it had a substantial drawback. Shooting an anxious glance at the door, you kick off from one of the table legs and spin in a little circle like a little kid. You do it a second time, and a third, and a fourth, until you see the door open and you quickly plant both feet on the floor and wait for your vision to clear a bit to see who it is. It doesn't take you long. There's no one that tall anywhere else on board, and you quickly wave to Tara with a sheepish grin on your face. He looks amused, and the first 2 fingers on his right hand tap against his palm. Ha ha. You smile and scoot out of the way so he can take his place on the other side of the table, informing you as he moves that someone else will be there shortly. Tara explains that he's going to ask questions, and the person that comes in is going to give answers. He shrugs his shoulders as he sits down in the chair, moving both wrists in a circle with his thumb and pinky extended to indicate that this would simply be a standard assignment. You nod your head, receptive and professional. He tells you that this won't take long, but you will have these kinds of meetings almost daily, maybe several of them a day, and you nod your head again, knowing better than to ask any questions. So, he glances at you, then at the door, and shrugs his shoulders a bit, as if figuring that you two have enough time for a quick chat. Why interpreter you? Prefer why? You pick up your hands, again a bit nervous with your grammar, but you had expected this sort of question and saw it coming. You tell him that you had always had a gift for languages. It was just something that had come easy to you as a child. You had always liked learning languages and meeting new people and seeing how they interacted within their given culture. You explain that over time it had evolved into less of a passive interest and more of a vocation, especially since you always found it easy to read people and sense the true agenda behind their words. You don't tell him this, but you were always deeply interested in the way people spoke. Sometimes it was an awkward pausing that gave it away, or the way they would fumble over certain words or signs, or the specific choice of words they used. But in the end, it always interested you to know that at the root of every syllable or gesture, there was an emotion. Whether it be happiness or jealousy or pride or disgust, there was always an impression of a feeling laced throughout whatever was said, and it was your job to convey not only the words, but the feeling the words carried with them. Communication didn't simply lie with the narrow confines of letters and grammar. Communication was an intangible, indescribable energy to make another being understand your own feelings and intentions, or purposely disguise them, and it was your job to convey that. On a massive scale, it was a very minor pursuit, but between two people, there could be no greater profession in the whole of the galaxy. He listens to you babble out your passions with interests, and you sense that he can read your excitement in the way your hands move energetically in front of you. He smiles and looks up at the ceiling when you are done, and he is quiet for a long while, as if processing what you had said. When he looks back at you, the friendly expression on his face has slipped, and there is something different in his eyes. He points to you. He gestures around you, taking his time to indicate the vastness of it all. Here. He hesitates for a moment before he meets your eyes again and makes a sign for fear. Are you afraid to be here? You blink at him, visibly taken aback, and he quickly asks if he was clear. You nod your head hurriedly and assert that yes, he was clear, before you bite your lip and look away, trying to think. Why would he ask you a question like that? Was this really a dangerous mission after all? Was he simply asking if you were afraid because you were on this base far away from home? You know you can't ask him any of these questions, and so you give the most neutral, but truthful, answer that you can. Lifting your hands confidently into the air, you tell him firmly and clearly that no, you are not afraid. You explain that you are an interpreter here, and your role here is to serve in communication. You don't know anything about the assignment at hand, and so you don't know anything that can be valuable to anyone. If you don't know anything, there's no reason for anyone to come after you. You pause, then look him in the eye and explain what he already knows, that if an interpreter does their job well, they are invisible. They don't get noticed. If you don't get noticed, there is no need to be afraid. He seems to consider this for a moment, and when you put your hands down, he utilizes the casual sign to show that he understands. Resting his elbow on the arm of the chair, he moves his forearm in a stiff up and down motion, holding his wrist steady, with his thumb and pinky extended. He holds up his hands again and collects his thoughts before signing. You take in each word carefully, putting together what he means to say in a series of eloquent sentences in your head. Not being noticed is not a choice, nor is it something you can control. Even if you do not speak to anyone here, you are still seen. People can see your face. You give off waves of emotion the same as anyone else, whether by sight or smell or... He touches the tip of his middle finger to his forehead and spells out the next word for emphasis. Sense. You can choose to be a shadow in the darkness, but you can easily be summoned by a simple flick of the light. He moves his fingers to imitate turning on the light switch, and you nod slowly. Was he trying to warn you that you had already been seen? Or was this just a bit of preemptive advice? He puts his hands down and you hesitate, not sure how to respond to this. Fortunately for you, you don't have to. At that moment, the door slides open and a stormtrooper in silver armor walks in. The rest of the stormtroopers that you had seen all wore white armor, so this must be someone of special rank or importance. His eyes sweep across the room, across you, and settle on Taro. Good. You had made sure to sit in this position to make him the ultimate authority in the room and keep as much focus on him as possible. The stormtrooper steps inside and sits down in his chair on the other side of the table, as if he already knows why he is there. You immediately turn your head to look at Taro, and he clearly makes the sign for Captain on his shoulder. He holds it for a moment to make sure you emphasize the rank before spelling out the name. Phasma. Captain Phasma, you ask? He had posed it as a statement, not a question, and you bite your tongue at your own incompetence. In return, Captain Phasma reaches up to remove his helmet, and you blink at the wisps of pale blonde hair as your eyes settle on his face. It's not a him. It's a her. You blush at your own stupidity. Of course there were probably female stormtroopers on board, and you shied yourself for not realizing this sooner. Still, you are a machine in this environment, not a person, and so you do your best to keep your face level and press all of your surprise and embarrassment into a box deep down away from you. You look at Taro, who asks why her armor is silver, and she tilts her head to the side as you repeat the question. Are you sure you don't mean to ask why I'm a woman? She asks. Is that your real question? You can't help the frown that tugs on the corners of your lips. No, he had clearly made the sign for silver, but you shake off any personal feelings and repeat her question exactly the way she had asked it, matching her casual yet aloof tone as best you could. He repeats his own question, this time including the sign for rank, and you clarify the question aloud. This seems to please her, and you slowly push away any personal reactions and thoughts and become a messenger, carrying their emotions and meanings and intentions back and forth to each other. Even though your mind is working too fast to process most of the conversation, you realize that you like Captain Phasma. It was one of those snap judgments about people that you couldn't help making, whether you wanted to or not. Idly, you wonder if she had worked with an interpreter before, because she was doing everything right. She was looking directly at him and ignoring you entirely, for starters. Some people had a constant tendency to stare at the interpreter, which bothered you to no end. You weren't the one they were conversing with, and so you sometimes had to hint for them to actually look at the person they were talking to. She also spoke directly to him, too. She didn't bother with any of that, tell him I say, or let him know that nonsense. Instead, she spoke what she meant in clear, concise phrases, which was something you appreciated. You assume most of this had to do with her actual demeanor and rank, but it was still something you appreciated nonetheless. Some people like to hear themselves speak and would go on, repeating the same point again and again, taking 100 words to express what they could have said in 3. Captain Phasma was straight to the point, didn't use any pretenses, and answered every question directly. It made your job so much easier. Taro had been right. The conversation didn't take that long, maybe only 30 to 40 minutes at most. At the very end, Captain Phasma said, "Please thank your interpreter for me. She did an excellent job." However, you were still so focused on the job at hand as you signed the message back to Taro that it completely went over your head as to who she was referring to. Taro smiled and gestured to give you permission to speak. You then blinked at him in confusion before you repeated the message back to yourself in your head and put 2 and 2 together. "Oh, thank you," you call after her, and hope the message reached her as the door snapped shut behind her. You sink back into the chair and press your fingers into your eyes, rubbing at both eyelids in one exaggerated motion. He smiles at you as you sit back up and you move your arms back and forth at your sides to get the blood flowing back into them. It felt like you had been asleep for the entire conversation and you were finally waking up inside yourself. It felt like you just woke up from taking a nap, but your sore muscles and fuzzy thoughts told you that you needed to take another one. It was a stressful job, both physically and mentally, and one that got a little better with time, but not much. The exhaustion of taking one language, one side of a conversation, figuring out its meaning, figuring out how to express the meaning in another language, saying it out loud with the correct tone and emotion, taking another side of the conversation, figuring out its meaning, expressing that meaning in another language, and using your hands and facial expressions to show their tone of voice was a headache to think about if you had to rationalize that this entire process took place in literal seconds. And then you did it again, over and over again, for 40 minutes straight. Taro waits for you to collect yourself before he asks if you are good. You don't know whether he means the assignment or if you yourself are good, so you just respond in the affirmative. He reminds you that you have 6 more months of this, and you shrug as if this makes no difference to you, because it really doesn't. The whole exchange hadn't been that bad, really. You had experienced far worse. He pats his stomach and then gestures to the door. Go get some food. You nod quickly and tell him that you'll see him tomorrow as you stumble out into the hallway. Told you she was still in there, Sadie says as you join the 3 of them out in the corridor. Let's get a move on, Shane says quickly. The rest of them start walking and Shane glances back at you. I don't think that silver one liked us hanging about in the hall too much. Oh. That's all you can say because you aren't sure what you could say that wouldn't break confidentiality. They know this and don't press you. Here in the hallway, you felt extremely exposed and it didn't feel right to say anything. Later in the room, with B present, you could feel free to debrief and express your thoughts and frustrations or ask for advice, such as, is there a sign for Starkiller Base? And, if X comes up in conversation, should you do Y or Z? In the privacy and safety of the group, you could safely diffuse your frustration with yourself for not realizing that Captain Phasma was a woman, since your interpersonal thoughts did affect your interpretations, consciously or not, but it was not something to dwell upon here. Fortunately, they are all headed down to the cafeteria anyway, and you are first in line. As you emerge into the lunchroom, though, you don't see a free table. It must be a popular hour, as most of the tables are filled with stormtroopers. You're about to ask Sadie what you should do when you hear a voice calling out to you. Hey girl, over here! You see Captain Phasma gesturing to you on your far left, and you nervously walk over to her table, afraid that she might try to talk to you about what she had discussed with Taro. That was a very strict, very big no-no. Assignments could be discussed with B and the others afterwards for the sake of learning, and yes, sometimes venting, but talking to another party about what had just transpired was a big, red, forbidden no. Still, you find yourself thanking her as you take a seat across from her. Her silver helmet is sitting on the table next to her tray of food, and you can't help but take the time to stare at it up close, seeing nicks and sharp indents in the armor that you can only assume are from battle. Do you have a name, girl? You give it to her quickly and force your eyes away from the helmet as they go back up to meet her face. I'm Captain Phasma, she says, as if you didn't remember her name before, and you nod your head quickly as you pick up your fork. She's watching you carefully, studying you, and you are not quite sure why. So do you really not remember? We were told you probably wouldn't. Remember? You blink at her and tilt your head to the side. Remember what? Was there something you were supposed to remember? Captain Phasma tilts back her head and laughs, a careless, free sound. You really don't, do you? How bizarre. You're about to ask for clarification when Sadie sits down beside you. We really don't, she chimes in, moving her hands wildly about her in front of her face as she talks. All of the words and signs and movements and meanings, it's like a whole big mess up there trying to figure out what everyone's saying and what everyone means to say that you're so focused on getting the words from there to here and here to there that you don't actually have the time to really process any of it. I'm surprised I can remember my own name afterwards. Captain Phasma, she says, looking at Sadie like she's a creature that she had never set eyes on before. Sadie, she says after a long breath, introducing Shane and Ladson as they sit down. You're pleased to see that the conversation does not focus on interpreting or whatever was discussed in that room. Instead, Captain Phasma seems delighted to tell you all about the workings of the base, informing you when the usual meal times are, and mentally handing you piles of important information that would be invaluable to know over the next 6 months. It is very, very appreciated, although you can't help but notice stormtroopers watching you out of the corners of their eyes. It's not just you realize that. It's the 4 of you, dressed so differently and seemingly serving no real purpose. What Taro says comes back to you. It doesn't matter if you serve a purpose or not, they are going to notice you anyway. Being noticed is not a choice, nor is it something you can control. He was right. Here you were, sitting at the captain's table of all places. You were bound to be noticed. People were going to see you, and people might even talk about seeing you. You were noticed now, and there was nothing you could do about it. If that was the case, the only thing you could do was put the best image of yourself out there. If people knew nothing about you, then there would be nothing for them to talk about. People couldn't take an interest in something they knew nothing about, unless, as you would soon come to learn, they were extremely interested in why they knew nothing at all about you.